In a previous video, I introduced you to cross-tabulations. And we were talking about cross-tabulations as a useful means of summarizing and cross-tabulating categorical variables. And I also showed you how we can rework or reshape our cross-tabulation using, in our case, raw percentages, in order for us to explore if there is any relationship between the level of gender, males and females, and the level of the second variable that we were analyzing, the levels of self-reported delinquency. And our aim was to understand if there was a connection, or let's say a correlation, between either of the gender and either of the levels of self-reported delinquency. Now, I also said in that video that we can employ our reshaped or reworked cross-tabulation using raw percentages as a basis for visualizing our cross-tabulation as a means toward an end, making sense of our small cross-tabulation. Now, as you can see on my screen, to the left-hand side here, we have our small cross-tabulation, gender versus the level of self-reported delinquency. In red, there is the raw total, and this is the table grand total, as you may remember. This is the reshaped table with raw percentages. As you can see, in red, we have what is called the average raw percentages. So this average raw percentage is representing the raw percentages calculated on the basis of the raw total. So these average raw percentages are expressing what is the proportion of a low, medium, and high disregarding gender. And this is really useful when we want to interpret our data, because the average raw percentages represent a sort of yardstick, a sort of baseline to which we can compare the individual raw percentages. Now, to the right-hand side, you can see a bar chart, which is based on the second table, the one with raw percentages. So we have these blue bars representing the females and the proportion of the females in each level of self-reported delinquency. The orange bar is representing the males, and the gray bar is representing the average percentage. And so we have three groups of three bars. And on the horizontal scale, on the horizontal axis, you can see the three categories of the level of self-reported delinquency: the low category, the medium category, and the high category. And it's easy this way to see a pattern, let's say, of association between gender and level of self-reported delinquency. It's easy to see that in the low level of self-reported delinquency category, there is a larger proportion of females, almost 41%, compared to males. And we can also see that the proportion of females in the low category of self-reported delinquency is larger than the average proportion, which is indicated by the gray bar. If we have a look to the high category of self-reported delinquency, it's easy to see that the trend is the opposite. We can see that there is a larger proportion of males in this category. The proportion of males is larger than the proportion of females. And we can also see, comparing those two bars to the average, to the bar representing the average proportion, we can see that the proportion of males is larger than the average proportion, and the proportion of females is not only smaller than the proportion of males, but it's also smaller than the average. And if we have a look at the medium level of self-reported delinquency category, we can see that as we said in the previous video, that the proportion of females is comparable to the proportion of males, and both are close to the average proportion. So the main pattern of, let's say, association that we can bring to the fore using our reward table and this visual aid, the main pattern of, let's say, association is between females and the low level of self-reported delinquency and males and the high level of self-reported delinquency. Of course, we can report this in a formal way, and we can state, for example, if we are to report our findings, we can state, as you can see on my screen, we want to understand if there is a relationship between gender and level of self-reported delinquency. And then we can explain the steps that we took in order to arrive at our conclusions. Accounts cannot be directly compared because they come from different totals. So we need to make them comparable. In order to do so, we turn the counts of our earlier cross-tabulation into raw percentages. We use raw percentages because our aim is to analyze the proportion of gender across the levels of self-reported delinquency. And then we can describe our chart. The chart and the table indicates that there is a higher proportion of females in the low category compared to the males. The proportion of females is above the average, while the proportion of males is below the average, as I said previously. There is no dramatic difference in the proportion of females and males when it comes to the medium category of self-reported delinquency. And then we can comment on the high level of self-reported delinquency category, and the chart and the table also show that there is a higher proportion of males than females in the high category, and the proportion of males is above the average proportion, that was 37%, while the proportion of females is below the average. And then we can conclude with a sort of summary of a short statement summarizing our findings. So overall, it can be seen that in our sample of 1,272 individuals, there is a tendency for females to be more associated to the low level of self-reported delinquency, while males tend to be more associated to the high level of self-reported delinquency.